Before you is Ikiro Hatoyama, the Prime Minister of Japan. In this photograph, he is smiling pleasantly with his good friend, one of the major shadow players in the world of the Yakuza. And here is the Prime Minister of Japan, Nobusuke Kishi. In the late 1950s, he publicly spoke before a Yakuza gang at the inauguration of a criminal boss. Here is his maternal grandson, also a future Prime Minister of the country, Shinzo Abe, smiling next to a highly influential gangster from the Yamaguchi-gumi syndicate. Another Prime Minister, Junichiro Koizumi, later confessed that there isn't a single member of parliament in Japan who isn't acquainted with a local mafia boss. Why is every major politician in Japan in some way associated with criminal gangs? The Yakuza are legendary gangsters, with a level of influence rivaled only by the Italian Mafia. As empires turned to dust and eras changed, they made money and carved out hefty portions of power. Not even the atomic bombing broke them. On the contrary, it only made them stronger. The Yakuza have embodied all the sins and virtues of Japan, but for a reason unknown to me personally, few attempt to unravel why the Yakuza are the most extraordinary organized crime group in the world. How did they come into existence, and why, right now, as you watch this video, are they disappearing? Today, we will attempt to rectify this. You will encounter declassified CIA archives, journalistic investigations, and admissions from former criminal bosses. We will dissect the main myths and determine where they blatantly lie and where they understate the scale of disaster. We will examine in detail how and on what the Yakuza earned, the schemes they used to smuggle cars through Vladivostok, and the trafficking of women on sex cruises throughout Asia. How did it happen that the Yakuza brought about the Russo-Japanese War and the Fukushima nuclear disaster? And why is the history of this organized crime group a story of one large betrayal? Unfortunately, I cannot show you a photograph of young Kazuo Taoka. He lived in such abject poverty that they simply didn't have money for a photo session. Taoka came from a poor farming family. His father died before he was born, and his mother when the boy was just 6 years old. The child was taken in by his uncle and aunt, but they treated him, to put it mildly, very coldly. Furthermore, the family had major issues with alcohol. By the age of 10, Taoka went to work at a shipyard in Kobe. Being a country boy, he looked with envy at how Japan's major cities were growing richer. During those years, the country was gaining strength and showing the world that it could also speak to other countries from a position of power. Yet, for thousands of rural poor, not much changed except that they became angrier. At the port, Taoka began to integrate into the collective, joining the local gang called Yamaguchi-gumi. Today there will be many Japanese names and terms. I apologize in advance to Japanese language experts for my pronunciations, incorrect stresses, and improper declensions. I have removed many terms but have kept the most key names and titles. Yamaguchi-gumi is one such name. Taoka performed small tasks for them. He learned from the elders, but he earned real fame and authority in street fights. His signature move was gouging out opponents' eyes, for which he received the nickname the Bear. There were plenty of people to fight against and reasons for it. At the time, Koreans were actively arriving in Kobe, and these newcomers were not welcome in Japan. A similar attitude was held towards the Burakumin, literally the untouchables. Although the caste system in the country had been abolished for half a century by then, the Japanese still harbored disdain for people whose parents or grandparents once worked with corpses or garbage. In the mid-1930s, Taoka Kazuo became a member of the Yakuza, which was a pivotal event in his life. It's important to understand that one couldn't join the Yakuza through an advertisement. There was only one way, through referral. In other words, another Yakuza had to recommend you. The factor of family ties in Japanese gangs is pushed to 300%. Undoubtedly, Italian mafiosi and biker clubs and gangs in Los Angeles often call themselves family. But for the Yakuza, saying it wasn't enough. It had to be proven through actions. The head of the Yakuza is not just a criminal authority, he is called the Oyabun, meaning father. The hieroglyphs literally denote a parental status. The subordinates of the Oyabun are the Kobun, meaning his children, a child status, Oyabun Kobun, father-son. This structure dates back to feudal Japan. Then too, everything was built on the model of relationships between father and children. Strict hierarchy, duty, obedience, and absolute loyalty to the elder. But the Yakuza didn't just blindly copy old orders. Many Yakuza, like Taoka, were guys from the social bottom, without family, without a future, literally from the streets. Some fled from poverty, some were abandoned by their parents. How do you make such people listen, stick together, and not tear each other's throats out? You need to give them what they never had and what they will value the most, a family. Not one they were born into involuntarily, but one they chose themselves. A brotherly collective they would be willing to tear throats for. There's a saying among the Yakuza, if the Oyabun says the crow is white, then it is white. This reflects their worldview, unquestioning loyalty to the elder. For many Yakuza, meeting the boss is the main event of their entire life.
What has been the defining memory or your most memorable moment?
会場との出会い。会場との出会い。
If you don't think like this, you don't belong in the organization. The Kobun had to be ready to do anything for his Oyabun. Protect him in a fight, take a bullet for him, no questions asked. Go to prison instead of him if necessary. Absolutely, he would go. To become a Kobun, one had to go through a complex ceremony. Father and son, remember, these gangsters modelled a real family, sat facing each other. A mediator first gave them snacks and then a cup of sake, which was to be drunk in 3 sips and then placed in the inner pocket close to the heart. The Kobun was warned. Now you drink from the Oyabun's cup, and after this, nothing else matters. You will remain loyal to the Oyabun and to him alone. Here are rare footage of how this ceremony took place in the early 1980s. It is the sake of father and son. As soon as you drink it, the bond will become stronger than flesh and blood. Boss, I eagerly anticipate starting to work for you. In the event that a son disappointed his father, punishment was prepared for the negligent Kobun. A finger segment would be cut off. This tradition dates back to the times of the samurai. Without a phalanx and a little finger, as you might guess, it is more difficult to hold a sword and thus to defend oneself. If you lose your little finger, metaphorically speaking, you become weaker and more vulnerable. Another symbol of subordination and dependence on the Oyabun, but the Kobun must remember. A finger without a phalanx will not save you in case of repeated mistakes. Moreover, your limbs can always become a bargaining tool between clans' warriors. For instance, if another Oyabun is not satisfied with monetary compensation, he may demand a phalanx as an apology. The Yakuza, it seems, regularly blundered. From statistics in the 1990s, we know that every second Yakuza went around without 1 phalanx, and every 8th without 2. Another old tradition of the Yakuza, of course, is tattoos. Originally, as in many countries, tattoos in Japan were a sign that a criminal stood before you. But over time, the symbol was reinterpreted. From a stigma, tattoos became a symbol of toughness, beginning in the 20th, that is, since the 19th century. By the end of the 20th century, Yakuza began covering most of their bodies, the biggest show-off being to leave no living space below the shoulders. Look at the engraving of a Yakuza more than 120 years old. Look at his hands and shoulders. Everything is covered. People familiar with tattoos will confirm that covering the entire body is incredibly lengthy, expensive, and painful. It would take dozens of sessions, probably. The most popular Yakuza tattoos are traditional dragons, lions, and don't be surprised, carp, because it swims against the current, just like the Yakuza. At the same time, you can see flowers. By the way, this is an entirely masculine tradition. In Japan, it is believed that arranging ikebana, landscaping gardens, and contemplating nature is beyond women. It's strictly men's work, so a beautiful flower on a Yakuza's body is an honor. However, these tattoos have a downside. Combined with an unhealthy lifestyle, substances, and a large amount of ink under the skin, The Yakuza have developed a traditional ailment, liver problems. So, when our first protagonist, Taoko Kazo, became a Yakuza, he signed his own verdict. Now his entire life, in one way or another, had to be intertwined with gangs. He could study at university, he could open businesses, but all of this would be done only for the clan and the dear Oyabun. However, Taoka's fate turned out to be more prosaic. Within the same year that he became a blood brother, he was imprisoned for 8 years for the murder of a Yakuza from a hostile gang. When he emerged, he would not realize in which country he found himself. He would have to rebuild the greatest Yakuza gang in the country's history from scratch. There are numerous, even too many theories about how exactly the Yakuza came into existence. It can be said with certainty that it is one of the oldest criminal organizations in the world. However, this is where debates arise. A popular legend claims that it all began in the 17th century. In those years, Japan united into a single state without internal strife. Peace was established, but what to do now with the hundreds of thousands of samurai wandering the cities? According to the legend, this led to the rise of the ronin, so to speak, masterless samurai. They indulged in alcohol and engaged in violence. In response to these atrocities, figures emerged who protected the peaceful populace from these unruly individuals. Many of them were also former samurai, but were honorable and righteous. The Yakuza adore this noble legend, and always attempt to emphasize that they are the heirs of those very Robin Hoods, that they have lived for 400 years by the codes of the samurai and the laws of the streets. However, the connection between modern Yakuza and those historical protectors of the common people is as tenuous as the connection between Julius Caesar and Caesar salad. That is to say, the connection may exist, but it is very tenuous. There is another modern theory from the mid-18th century. Previously in Japan, there was an entire class of itinerant street vendors. They sold low-quality goods and various trinkets. Historically, the country had a network of large and good roads. Itinerant merchants travelled from city to city on these roads. Much of their business was based on deception. Their favourite trick was for a vendor to take an ordinary box covered with cheap gold paint and present it as golden. To enhance the effect, the vendor would pretend to be drunk. The buyer would think, "This strange man has drunk too much and does not realize he is selling a valuable item for a pittance." In the end, the person believed they made a profitable deal when, in reality, they had been swindled. These swindlers, like the modern Yakuza, had a hierarchy: father-son, oyabun-kobun. Moreover, they operated a revenue redistribution system. All proceeds flowed to the oyabun, who would then distribute the money. They had only 3 principles. Do not touch the wife of another merchant while he is traveling the country. Do not reveal secrets to the police. And, of course, be loyal to the oyabun. For violations, they would be expelled, not just verbally. The person would be given an official document of expulsion, and copies would be sent to other criminal groups so that everyone knew not to do business with him. It is believed that from this time the word Yakuza originated. In an old card game there is a losing hand, which used to be pronounced as Yakuza in Japanese. Over time the word was adopted by the bandits themselves. We are Yakuza. We are useless to society, and we are proud of it. Consequently, Yakuza became an umbrella brand that encompassed various types of swindlers, bandits, adventurers, and even the burakumin, the untouchables. Now, we need to answer 3 questions. Otherwise, it will be difficult to move forward. The first question is why the Yakuza did not disappear over 200 or even 400 years. The second is what the real country of the Yakuza looks like if viewed without rose-colored glasses. And the third question, why are Japan and the Yakuza essentially the same? What is important to understand from the beginning? Japan is a highly urbanized country. Cities began to grow there a long time ago, and along with them urban life flourished. Megacities such as Edo, now Tokyo, Osaka and Kyoto were among the largest not only in the region but in the world by the early 19th century. And where there is urban culture, there are urban vices. One of the most famous of these, which any tourist in Japan has likely noticed, is gambling addiction. No matter which city you find yourself in, whether on a tourist street or not, you will certainly notice the massive neon-lit stores. This is the famous pachinko industry, something between a slot machine and pinball. Pachinko is part of the Japanese cultural code, much like chess is for Indians. Modern statistics indicate that every 10th Japanese person plays pachinko, with an annual turnover reaching up to $200 billion. Pachinko are slot machines on steroids. A player shoots a ball that must land, like in pinball, in a difficult-to-reach hole to hit the jackpot. Moreover, the player controls the strength of the launch, creating a false illusion of control. All of this is accompanied by mesmerizing lights and music with infinite TikTok-like gameplay. Importantly, one ball can be bought for only 4 yen. This is a crucial detail that explains a lot about Japanese law functioning. Formally, gambling has long been strictly regulated. The penalties are very severe. For example, pachinko winners cannot be paid in cash, only prizes, and inexpensive ones at that, such as toys. But under the same laws, it is perfectly legal to open a counter nearby that will exchange these prizes for money. The main requirement is that the legal entities are registered to different people, and that's it. The law is complied with. More than 6,000 pachinko parlors operate based on this scheme. The average profit of one such place is estimated at $13 million per year. Pachinko is a gold mine, and it has long been a magnet for crime, such as people forging receipts and robbing these counters, or skilled fraudsters who tampered with the machines. The Yakuza quickly understood the essence of this. The profits were already enormous, and there was even more to skim off through minor deceptions. For instance, they could create modified chips to rig game results. If a venue needed to gain traction, it would initially increase the player's chances of winning. People flock in, word of mouth works, and then, once the flow of customers is established, the comfort level can be subtly decreased, and the money begins to flow the other way. Another source of income is expensive magazines for gambling enthusiasts. Japan has these too, offering supposedly useful advice: when to spin, how much to bet, which machines are lucky. A more merciless scheme involves loan sharks. These people hang around right at the exit of the hall. As soon as a gambling addict loses sufficiently, they approach, start a friendly conversation, and offer money on loan, naturally with extortionate interest rates. The most insidious tactic is when casinos share the databases of the luckiest players with sex workers. These women then reach out to these fortunate individuals and slowly milk them dry until they spend everything they've won, often adding more on top. The sex industry is also closely linked with the Yakuza, and its prosperity is no coincidence. The attitude towards women in Japan, still, to put it mildly, leaves much to be desired. In the Middle Ages, the idea of female subordination was solidified under the slogan "Dansan Johi," which can be translated as "respect men, despise women." These prejudices became deeply ingrained in Japanese culture and law, to the minutest details. There is a telling story. Once, an official felt unwell at a sumo wrestling event. As he was dying, a female medic rushed to save his life, but people began to shout at her to get off the ring because she was considered impure, and sumo is a sacred sport. This situation is both tragicomic and absurd for the 19th or the 20th century, but it actually happened in 2018. Therefore, there is nothing surprising about the thriving culture of prostitution, pimping, and sex trafficking in the country. The Yakuza were among the first to take control of sexual services and have not let go since. I will elaborate on the horrors occurring in this industry later on. Another factor explaining why the Yakuza are the way they are is the completely manic Japanese workaholism and the cult of loyalty to corporations. You might think that the story of adopting regular Yakuza members is strange, right? You'd be surprised, but in Japan, Adults are adopted more often than children, primarily for business purposes. The Japanese have a thing for family businesses. It is believed that these businesses last longer than regular companies, so if a company owner doesn't have a blood heir, he can simply adopt a suitable person. This could be a promising manager, a reliable employee, or even his own son-in-law. The main thing is that he can continue the family business. Suzuki, Toyota, Canon, Kikkoman, which produces soy sauce, are all family businesses. The Huisi Ryokan Hotel has been in operation since the year 728. Charlemagne, the father of Europe, wasn't even born yet, and people were already ordering breakfast to their rooms there. The Japanese are the fiercest workaholics. Look at this graph. In the 1970s, Japanese people consistently worked over 2,000 hours a year. The peak of Japanese workaholism was during the years of the economic miracle. Back then, Japanese workers put in almost 500 more hours a year than the French. It's equivalent to having not 250, but 310 working days in a year. Another purely Japanese phenomenon is devotion to work. Since the beginning of the 20th century, certain rules have been in place in Japan. If you get a job with a company, you won't be easily dismissed from it. Moreover, promotions are often based not on merit, but on years of service, meaning it's disadvantageous to leave a company as you stand to lose too much. What am I getting at? The Yakuza could only have appeared and survived in Japan. The cult of tradition, loyalty and hierarchy became strong precisely because Japan had long had huge cities that attracted gambling, sex and alcohol, the foundation on which a criminal business could be built. Plus the fear of chaos. After the war, the country was shaken so much that the Japanese are still afraid of disorder. This is why their crime is strictly structured, almost like a protocol. What can be said if even their chauvinism managed to be systematized? This is truly a paradox. Modern Japan is the birthplace of hikikomori, those very young men who do not leave their homes for years. It is a country of charming spirits, the sweetest cafes where couples go on dates. However, only 90 years ago, Japan was as hated in Asia as the Nazis were in Europe. Japanese military conducted such brutal and senseless experiments on people that Joseph Mengele would gladly have found work there. This refers to the infamous Unit 731. How could this even become possible? Who awakened such cruelty in the Japanese? You would be surprised. But the Yakuza had a hand in this as well. Before you is the boss of bosses, the great of the East, the Vito Corleone of the Yakuza world, about whom surprisingly little information is available. This is about Toyama Mitsuru, the greatest grey eminence of Japan. He was born in the year 1855 into a family of impoverished samurai. When the boy was 13, a pivotal event for the country occurred in Japan, the Meiji Restoration, or even Revolution. To avoid getting lost in the intricacies of Japanese history, let's highlight the main points. After this revolution, power in the country formally shifted to the emperor, and the former samurai, who once ruled the country, were left out in the cold. They lost their special status, were forbidden to wear swords, and were forced to look for a new place in life. Toyama, a samurai's son, as one might guess, was not pleased with the restoration. He managed to participate in uprisings against the emperor. At the age of 20, the young man even ended up in prison, and he did not waste his time there. When he was released, he became the emperor of the slums, distributing money to the poor, intimidating or helping small traders. Toyama was an ultranationalist with an emphasis on ultra. His organization was called the Dark Ocean Society, Toyama's main message. The Japanese nation must be loved, but there is only one step from love to hate. Other Asian peoples, Koreans, Chinese, and everyone who happened to be on the other side of the Dark Ocean between Japan and the mainland were declared enemies. Before the appearance of this character, Yakuza was street dust. They traded at fairs, played cards, engaged in petty deals. With his arrival, everything changed. Now the thugs started acting in the national interest. They beat protesters, guarded ministers. Even at that time, they became a shadow tool for politicians, convenient and obedient. Soon, Toyama moved to a new level of terror. His thugs planted a bomb that blew off the leg of the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They then stabbed a liberal politician and ultimately killed another minister. Toyama did this, evidently not just for the sake of it, but for money from right-wing politicians. In the year 1895, terror crossed the ocean. Toyama's agents assassinated the Queen of Korea, who dared to seek help from Russia, which subsequently became a reason for Japan to start a war there. Toyama spent a lot of money and effort on anti-Russian propaganda. He painted the Russians as 16th-century barbarians that needed to be overcome for the sake of civilization. In the year 1903, a Russian admiral wrote about these militarists. The party members were many, and each strived to stand out with the sharpness, shamelessness, and thoughtlessness of their judgments. We remember what all this led to. The Russo-Japanese War, which turned out to be a cold shower for the Russian Empire. It would be too bold to claim that the Yakuza started the Russo-Japanese War, but to some extent they succeeded in provoking it. The peak of Toyama's career was the Great Japan National Essence Society. The organization had 60,000 members, Yakuza, laborers, and ultra-rights. It was a violence factory overseen by curators in the Japanese Department of the Interior. In the 1930s, right-wing organizations in Japan scaled up significantly. Moderate politicians either went into hiding or were killed. From 1930 to 1945, the police recorded nearly 3 dozen incidents. Attempts, the assassinations of 2 prime ministers, 2 finance ministers, and coup attempts. Against this backdrop, Toyama's star shone even brighter. The old man had travelled the path from an ideologically motivated gangster to a shadow puppet master. The Yakuza did not lag behind. They went to Manchuria and China ostensibly to develop the lands, but in fact to rob and create chaos. Their representatives started working in the opium state monopoly. The drug trade in China, which they engaged in, was estimated to bring Japan $300 million a year, an astronomical sum at that time, all according to 19th-century manuals. While Toyama dealt with foreign policy, the Yakuza continued to operate on the ground. Their main achievement of these years was that they managed to acquire ports, not without the help of authorities. It was a win-win situation for both sides. The Yakuza eliminated left-wing union leaders who constantly organized strikes and, in return, gained access to the ports. This asset was incredibly valuable in a country where all imports were maritime. The business was so profitable that wars for contracts and spheres of influence flared up between Oyabans. By the end of the 1930s, Japan began to actively conquer Asia. Initially, everything worked out well for them, but then Pearl Harbor happened. The Japanese bit off more than they could chew, and they began to choke. When the Great War began, politicians had no time for ultra-right gangsters. The major ideologists went to work for the government or ended up in prison, and the Yakuza donned military uniforms. Mitsuru Toyama himself lived to the age of 89 and died in the year 1944. He witnessed the moment when Japan controlled half of Asia, but did not live to see its complete capitulation. Perhaps this would have sobered him up a little. Portraits of this shadow leader can still often be found in Yakuza offices to this day. And here, we must draw attention to the large, somewhat paradoxical elephant in the room. As many of you well know, a considerable number of gangs are formed based on the same principle. People are oppressed, they band together, start competing with others for territory and influence, and then gang formations emerge. The Yakuza in this system is no exception. Thanks to the principles promoted by Toyama, today the Yakuza is comprised of, surprisingly, either 15% or almost a third of Koreans, despite them accounting for only 0.5% of the entire population of Japan. It is, in fact, a natural process. After the occupation of Korea, especially in the 1930s, Japan began mass deportations of Koreans from the peninsula to the rear. When the war ended in 1945, many returned home, but hundreds of thousands of people remained. Yet, in the country, no one was happy to see them. As soon as it became possible, Koreans began to face rights restrictions. Essentially, it did not matter whether a person knew the Japanese language or understood the culture. It reached absurdity. Let's imagine a situation. Here you have a boy named Ren. His father is Japanese and his mother is Korean. He is a full-fledged Japanese with his whole life ahead of him. And then there's a boy named Hen. On the contrary, his mother is Japanese and his father is Korean. According to the Japanese, Ren and Hen belong to completely different strata. For Ren, whose father is Japanese, all doors are open. But Hen with a Korean father is on tenuous grounds in this country. He won't be able to get into public service, won't make a career in corporations. Even for an ordinary job, Ren would be preferred over Hen, the only difference being the nationality of their father. So basically, dear Koreans, we captured you, took you from your homeland, made you work for us, and then reconsidered, deciding not to grant you the same rights we have. And then everything followed the textbook pattern. Koreans found themselves socially isolated. And surprise, surprise, they began to form gangs. Thus they joined the Yakuza, and there they were warmly welcomed. Despite their ultra-right views in politics, the Japanese criminal world was a melting pot, a triumph of meritocracy where judgment was based on merit, not on the nationality of one's father. Koreans joined the Yakuza not out of a good life. They were literally pushed there, and the Yakuza rubbed their hands together. The more outcasts, the stronger the family. And here enters the stage a person who exploited this situation to the fullest, Yoshio Kodama. Before meeting Toyama, Kodama was interested in socialism. He then moved on to ultra-right movements, a living embodiment of the horseshoe theory, where polar political movements are closer than we think. In his youth, Kodama also aspired to stage a coup and seize power. He was involved in political assassinations, which eventually landed him in prison. By the 1930s, after his release, Kodama realized that fighting the authorities was a bad idea, and it was much more profitable to work with them. Thus, he found himself in the army, first in intelligence, and then he started doing business in occupied China. His scheme was simple, but effective. Kodama approached the Chinese with weapons in hand and forced them to sell resources cheaply. As a result, he came into possession of factories, plants, farms, and mines. At the same time, he supplied the Japanese army with everything he could, from bearings to motor oil. There was also a shadow side to his business, the drug cartels. Kodama, it seems, controlled the entire opium market, which at the time was coming from Shanghai. As the war was drawing to its logical end, Kodama was not caught off guard and transported thousands of gold bars from China to Japan. At that time, the value of the loot was estimated at $200 million. Soon after Japan capitulated, Kodama was imprisoned as a war criminal, not just any, but of Class A. This same group included the Prime Minister of Japan, Hideki Tojo, who would later be executed. And here begins a small conspiratorial theory, arising from several real facts. We know that in prison, Kodama established contacts with politicians who later went far. One of them even became the Prime Minister of the country for a couple of years. We mentioned him at the beginning of the video. Secondly, we know that Kodama somehow sponsored these politicians. Among other things, Kodama's money contributed to the formation of the Liberal Party of Japan. Later, this party merged with the Democratic Party to form the Liberal Democratic Party, the main right-wing party of the country, which has been ruling Japan almost uninterruptedly for 70 years. Thirdly, we know that the American intelligence services had information on Kodama. They even prepared a couple of reports on him. And fourthly, most importantly, regarding prison and Class A. For reasons not fully understood, Kodama was released from there. He did not leave feet first, he walked out on his own feet. However, as did hundreds of other war criminals. And from these four details, a conclusion is constructed that Kodama was a CIA agent. That means The Yakuza and American intelligence services have been holding the main political force of the country by the scruff for 70 years and generally running everything. Let us try to understand. To grasp the American intelligence services' stance on Kodama, let's see what they wrote about him in their documents. Kodama is not a spy, but an outright con artist, bandit, swindler, and thief. All that interested him was money and personal power, regardless of the price or the consequences for the country. When he speaks, he either lies or misleads. Thus, it is clearly stated Kodama is a rotten apple. As an agent, he is a total zero. But it is challenging to argue Kodama genuinely came out of prison unscathed. There is a key theory that he reached an agreement with the Americans. The terms were that he would provide them with data about China and the criminal underground, and they would grant him freedom. Whether this was truly the case, we do not know for certain. But even if there was a deal, its scale seems exaggerated. This is precisely where such a theory stems from. Kodama became a link between politicians and the Yakuza. And this is something one can already believe. Primarily, Kodama is remembered for helping the greatest Yakuza group in the history of Japan to rise, the Yamaguchi-gumi organization. The Yakuza have no formal code. They live by intuition and concepts of honor. What exactly this means, no one can say for sure. Each member has their own understanding. In simple terms, the rules of the game are roughly as follows. Never disclose the organization's secrets, do not attack uninvolved women and children, do not use drugs, do not hide money from the gang, listen to the oyabun, remain cool-headed and honor-bound, resolve all matters without police involvement. Additionally, there is the expectation of endurance against pain, hunger, and death. Dying in battle for a Yakuza is considered honorable, even poetic, especially if it is for the oyabun. To this code, two key terms are added. The first is giri, a blend of duty, gratitude, and even guilt when you must do something because otherwise you are not human. Giri forms the foundation of the oyabun-kobun relationship, which is akin to father-son. When you drink sake, you owe your father until the grave. The second term is ninjo. Essentially, it is human emotion, humanity, compassion, kindness, empathy, the drive to help the weak. In other words, it is the counterbalance, an informal emotional counterbalance to the sense of duty of giri. This conflict between ninjo and giri forms the essence of Yakuza philosophy. Conditionally, you may have to eliminate a friend who is a traitor, but you pity him. The Yakuza always display these ninjo and giri, both now and half a century ago. They are the heirs of the samurai, people of depth, knowledgeable people. Every contracted killing is a deep emotional struggle. And this, my friends, is nothing more than fluff from a rich ramen broth. Perhaps the only ironclad rule that Yakuzas truly adhere to is loyalty to the oyabun. Neither Mexican nor Italian nor Irish gangs can compare to the level of loyalty and submission that exists in the Yakuza. This is a fact. This is even joked about in the Japanese police. What is the crime called when one Yakuza kills another Yakuza? Destruction of property. By the way, there is a story about their coolness and restraint. In 2007, a Yakuza boss attempted to kill a nurse. Do you know why? She made a joke during his penis enlargement surgery. Fortunately, the nurse survived, but the boss was later sentenced to death for the attempted murder. Such paradoxes are common in the Yakuza. In their cultural code, losing composure means ceasing to be cool. Yet most Yakuza are utterly uncontrollable. They are called hanikari. Violence is everything to them. Violence is like punctuation in a sentence for them. You can use philosophical justifications and talk about an unwritten code of conduct all you want. Double standards. That's the foundation of their philosophy. People used to believe Yakuza were gentlemen. They could help the weak fight the strong. Those times are gone. Now it's all about money. Money is everything, although it was always the same. And money from prostitution, gambling, and political contracts was always there. The same story with the claim that Yakuza supposedly do not use firearms. Of course, they all use them. The statistics from the police regarding thousands of confiscated pistols speak for themselves. Viewing this situation with extreme cynicism, declaring high values to unite people around them does not equate to adhering to those same values. That is because these tasks are fundamentally different. Uniting people around an ideology or checking daily against some unwritten code of rules. After the unconditional surrender and the devastation wrought by atomic bombs, the country was in ruins. Consider it a clean slate. At this point, the ranks of the Yakuza began to swell with a new type of criminal, the so-called garantai, former members of the Japanese military, who were prepared for the most brutal methods. They took control of brothels and, more importantly, immediately began integrating into the power system with the Americans. As early as the year 1947, only 2 years after the beginning of the occupation, Colonel Charles Cades, one of those who helped draft the new Japanese constitution, openly stated that a powerful criminal network was operating in the country, permeating everything from the villages to the highest echelons of power. After the war, every fifth worker in Japan, in one way or another, interacted with the Yakuza. They were everywhere, in the mines, in the markets, in politics, and naturally in construction. This is the main business in all countries ruined by war. Importantly, the American authorities did not combat crime at all. This was precisely what the main character of our story, from where we began this episode, Taoka Kazuo, took advantage of. He'd spent the entire war in prison, and during the time he was absent from freedom, everything had changed. Apart from the lost war, his oyabuns had died. Therefore, as a loyal, respected man, and especially one who had served time, he took the paternal throne. Taoka became the boss of the Yamaguchi-gumi in the third generation. He was 33 years old, and under his command were only 25 kobun. However, Taoka proved to be an absolute genius of both strategy and tactics. Firstly, he launched a construction company, a business historically riddled with corruption in Japan. An interesting fact is that almost half of all bribery and kickback cases in the country revolve around the real estate market. Once he gained some authority, Taoka absorbed a local gang, with whose help he seized the gambling, fortune-telling, and lottery market. Then another gang, the Koreans from Osaka. But most importantly, Taoka never let go of the key asset of the Yamaguchi-gumi, those very port docks in Kobe, where he had started working as a child. By the mid-1960s, the Yamaguchi-gumi controlled 80% of all cargoes coming into Kobe. By that time, Taoka had also ventured into the transportation company business, which in the year 1965 alone brought him nearly $17 million. The Yakuza had become a mass phenomenon for the first time. Consider the figures. In the year 1958, the police counted 70,000 Yakuza, and by the year 1963, already 184,000. This was more than the entire Japanese army at that time. The Yamaguchi-gumi was the main group among all. Nearly 10,000 people reported directly to Taoka, peaking at 40,000. In the 1960s, the Yamaguchi-gumi had already taken over the entire Kansai region. Kazuo Taoka sat at the top of the criminal pyramid, controlling the ports, show business, construction, and even sumo wrestling. Yet, it was not enough for him. He desired to take over the capital, Tokyo. At this moment, our puppeteer, Yoshio Kodama, re-entered the scene. He had long dreamed of a mega-project, to unite all Japanese gangs into one large syndicate. Kodama approached Taoka with this idea, but Taoka immediately dismissed him. "Why do I need your alliances?" he retorted. "I already have everything under control here." Kodama persisted, and nonetheless assembled an alliance from the capital's gangs. Moreover, he began crafting a strategy against Taoka to prevent him from entering Tokyo. Taoka accepted the challenge and started his campaign, sending his Yamaguchi gang fighters into the heart of Tokyo to incite shootouts. Chaos erupted in the capital, drenching the streets in blood. Kodama eventually backed down and offered a compromise. allow Yamaguchi to maintain a limited presence under Tokyo. Here, the leader of Yamaguchi-gumi demonstrated his criminal genius. He turned to public relations and launched a bogus anti-drugs campaign, claiming, "Look, our guys, Yamaguchi-gumi, are for the purity of the streets." He managed to gather wives of drug addicts and orchestrated these unfortunate women into protests in Tokyo. All of Japan watched as the Yakuza suddenly became the country's savior. Taoka even gave an emotional interview, lamenting how drugs were ruining the lives of his subordinate. This was ironic, considering he controlled Japan's main port. One might wonder how drugs ended up in Kobe in the first place. As you can guess, participants from his gang mainly led the Tokyo protests. The provocation worked, and street tension rose. One of the Tokyo fighters wounded an out-of-town fighter, causing panic. The boss of Kodama's alliance sought reconciliation, offering 10 million yen and a severed pinky finger as a peace offering. In the year 1972, Yamaguchi-gumi cemented the alliance with sake and a handshake, following the best traditions of the Yakuza. Through his cunning strategy and adept public relations, Taoka seized control of all the major cities in the country. Nonetheless, a year later, at 68, he died of a heart attack. When this became known, the authorities warned against any public funerals, but who listened? 3 months later, hundreds of Yakuza from all over the country gathered in Kobe. Even showbiz stars whom Taoka had once helped came, singers, actors, including the one who had portrayed him in film. According to tradition, each left a donation to honor the boss of bosses, collecting $500,000. After Taoka's death, his wife temporarily became the patriarch of Yamaguchi, an unprecedented event. However, as it happened in Yugoslavia after the leader's death, a great civil war began. One Yakuza did not recognize the authority of another, a common issue among gangs. The unthinkable occurred. The Kumicho, the supreme patriarch, was gunned down in an elevator. Thus began the bloodiest war in Yakuza history. In 1 year, the police recorded over 500 clashes. Blood flowed on the streets even during the day, contravening the gang's laws. The slaughter only ended 8 years later, in 1989. The rebels petered out, and the Yamaguchi-gumi maintained their leadership status. Indeed, funding and other resources for a street war had to come from somewhere. And in this regard, the Yakuza were well equipped. The figures, dating back to the 1980s, became known from the criminals themselves. A godfather with hundreds under his command could earn more than $500,000 a year. The main source of income was yunikin, the so-called donation that everyone was obliged to pay him. Lower-ranking bosses earned around $130,000. Meanwhile, ordinary Yakuza members received about $30,000, comparable to the national average salary. However, there were other perks. Corporate imported cars, every third from Europe or America, career growth prospects, women and alcohol. Their life was clearly better than the poverty they fled from. To understand the Yakuza's economy, let's start with something relatively harmless. For instance, the scheme where people would suddenly jump out of the bushes onto the hood of your car, then demand money. This scheme was popular before the era of dashcams and street cameras. Today, a similar story involves a person walking down the street with an expensive phone without a case and an already cracked screen. The scammer bumps into the victim, drops the smartphone on the ground, and then the phone supposedly breaks. Immediately, an accomplice rushes over, pretending to be a witness, and they both start pressuring the startled person to resolve the issue with them on the spot. It sounds trivial, but the police estimate the net profit from this scheme to be several $1,000,000 a year. Another small scheme involves bars with decoys. Imagine you meet a charming girl who inexplicably likes you very much. Instead of going to a well-known bar, she insists that you go with her to some strange establishment without a sign. At the end of the evening, you take the check and find out that one shot of sake cost you $30. There's no escaping it. Rough estimates suggest this scam brings gangs up to $10 million a year. Speaking of bars, it's worth noting that even legitimate establishments were once under Yakuza control. In 1995, a survey showed that out of 60,000 bars and restaurants, no fewer than 18,000 operated under the Yakuza umbrella, which means they paid the Yakuza tribute. Or, more often, they were forced to work with Yakuza contractors. One supplies you towels, another coffee, a third food, and a fourth ice for cocktails. If a bar refused to pay, basic methods of pressure were used. They would bring in drunks, stack them up there and let them lie around at the entrance, or bring a crowd to a restaurant and start a ruckus. Or, for instance, toss a cockroach into the salad, then make a scandal out of it. The stories often go unproved. Formally, there was nothing to charge the Yakuza with, but the business would end up hostage. Another semi-legal income scheme was betting on horse racing, bicycle racing and boat races. The latter, by the way, is a unique story invented and lobbied by another former Yakuza. It is difficult to say for certain, but at least half of the income of the groups is held in the grey, if not completely in the black zone. Historically, they make enormous profits in the vice industry. The Yakuza have been involved in this for nearly all time, but after the laws of the 1950s, which removed prostitution from the legal field, this sphere naturally fell into their hands. It is important to understand two things here. The first aspect is legal. In Japan, any sexual service except for the conventional national sex, which can lead to childbirth, can be sold. Everything is completely legal. The second thing is cultural. When it comes to vice, the Japanese are a people attracted to everything unconventional. There are, for instance, places where people pay just to watch a girl change clothes, or bars where beautiful women simply engage in pleasant conversations with lonely men. There are cafes where this communication can lead to something interesting, like a massage. The demand for any kind of sex service in Japan is enormous. Loneliness, workaholism, a permissive attitude towards infidelity. And if there's demand, then supply must be created. But where to find so many sex workers? This is where the Yakuza come into play. The scheme is incredibly simple. The client, this could be a brothel, a Yakuza gang, or just a billionaire, contacts a Yakuza manager. He goes to a Yakuza broker who is already in contact with agencies that kidnap girls locally. They are also connected with local gangs. Naturally, the police are fully controlled. The scheme might even be simpler. When the Yakuza find girls from poor countries who are interested in Japan and a better life, they approach them directly, transport them into the country, and they end up in sexual slavery. A typical and unfortunately truthful story. Some non-profit organization contacts a 17-year-old girl, for example, from Thailand and promises her a better life. They really do transport her to Japan, but from the airport she is immediately taken to a club to a mama-san, the manager of the brothel. The girls are told, darling, just transporting you cost a few million yen. Bribes have to be paid from something. Now you will work it off. For the girl, this will take 5 years. Every day she will service 10 clients. Another favorite Yakuza story is sex tours to other countries. They have been organizing these trips since almost the 1960s, where clients relax for weeks in an atmosphere of alcohol, illegal substances, and women. In general, wherever there is lust, there is also the Yakuza. They manage clubs, place their people, and handle logistics. The largest source of income for the Yakuza has, of course, been illegal substances. I think you understand which ones. During World War II, it was generally issued to workers and soldiers, including kamikaze. After the war, it was banned, but the demand never went away. An underground market quickly emerged, which the Yakuza took over. Due to police raids, production moved to South Korea, particularly Busan, from where the goods were sent to Japan. In the 1980s, when Koreans turned against these factories, production was established in Taiwan, mainland China, and North Korea. By the 1970s, half of the income for the Yakuza came from illegal substances. Later, the share of drug trafficking began to decrease. Why risk it when you can control legitimate businesses? A new promising market for the Yakuza became the Russian Far East. The real boom occurred in the year 1992. The Soviet Union collapsed, and Vladivostok, which had previously been a closed city, opened up to the world. The main trade, of course, was in right-hand drive cars. At that time, Japan was full of great cars from which owners parted easily. It was more profitable just to buy a new car than to pay for maintenance. But who needs legal schemes when you can make huge money through deception? Clients in Vladivostok could order any car, down to the make and colour. There were also craftier schemes. For example, the Yakuza would steal a car, take out a large insurance policy on it, then stage a theft, collect the insurance money, and the car would be sent to Russia. Double profit. Besides, weapons, chemicals and medicines that could be used to produce something illegal were sent from Russia. By the early 2000s, this method was shut down. In Japan, laws against the Yakuza were tightened, and in the Far East, authorities seriously cracked down on crime and began, notably, deporting Yakuza members who were hiding in Vladivostok. However, the Yakuza did not despair. They still had endless earning schemes. Among the illegal ones was money lending. The scheme is as old as time. You find a person who can't get a loan from the bank, lend them money at an exorbitant interest rate, and when they, of course, can't pay it back, you start pressing them. The Yakuza have a unique motivation. In Japan, the expression "to die of shame" is not just a figure of speech, it's a very real possibility. And the Yakuza know this. Therefore, they pressure debtors through their relatives and colleagues. They might call work to announce that you owe everyone around. There is even a special term, yohatsu, which refers to people who have literally disappeared, left their family, their job, did something very terrible to themselves to escape from debts and shame. In the year 1982, more than 7,000 people were officially reported missing. As you might guess, the Yakuza had a hand in this too. The most notorious and unsavory profession of these financial bandits is sokaya. Essentially, it's extortion and blackmail on a massive scale. The scheme is as simple as 2 yen. You gather compromising material and blackmail top managers with it. The Yakuza approached the matter seriously. They hired a staff of private detectives, combed through archives, and could set up a sting. For example, if they found out that the head of a certain company liked to drink heavily. So, at the right moment, they would set their girls on him who would spend the night with him, spike his drink, and press the record button on their camera. Then the Yakuza engaged in greenmail, buying up shares of the company and obtaining the right to attend shareholder meetings and prove something there. At these meetings, the Trojan horse from the Yakuza would come in with a thick folder and lay all the cards on the table. As the saying goes, if there's no money, there's no head. Here, everything operates on the same logic as with shame. For the Japanese, honor and reputation are very important, and if the company's huge money is at stake, no one will take a risk. Then a more cunning scheme appeared. The Yakuza threatened to publish compromising material in their newspaper, leaving the victim no choice but to buy the entire print run, for example, 150,000 copies. In the year 1993, it became known that leading investment companies in the country, Nomura, Daiwa, Yamaichi, and Nikko, even the largest bank in Japan, were paying billions in settlements. As those familiar with the Yakuza say, our old acquaintance Yoshio Kodama made big money in this field. However, to say that nearly the entire modern economy of Japan is tied to the Yakuza would be an exaggeration. Although, if desired, criminal roots can even be found in Nintendo. The world's most adorable and fluffy company, if you rewind to the beginning of the 20th century, produced playing cards for the very card game from which the name Yakuza originates. Experience taught the Yakuza that in order to survive, it was necessary to maintain the gang's reputation, and for this purpose, They conducted the most massive PR campaigns for crime worldwide. The Yakuza have been involved in shaping their public image for a long time and very thoroughly. One of the first to understand this was Taoka Kazuo, one of our main characters. He actively extended his reach into professional sports, boxing, sumo, wrestling, baseball, and most importantly, various creative productions and talent agencies. Remember, I mentioned that actors gathered en masse for his funeral. At some point, the Yakuza, specifically the Yamaguchi Gumi Group, became the shadow film producers of the country. The criminal bosses determined which films were worth watching for the Japanese and which weren't. Now the Yakuza are no longer criminals but noble bandits with a code of honor. The basis of any plot was the struggle between Giri and Ninjo, duty versus feeling. These films were made, among others, by former Yakuza, such as Koji Shundo. By the mid-1970s, Japan was producing about 100 such films annually. During this time, the image of the Yakuza was cemented. Black business suits, white shirts, ties and short haircuts. Sunglasses and an American or at least European car, mainly Mercedes, were essential. In other words, the image of the Yakuza was created and funded by the Yakuza themselves. Naturally, everything would be depicted attractively and nobly. During the same period, masterpieces like Battles Without Honor and Humanity were released. Although the film did not portray the Yakuza in the best light, it still became a cult classic. As we know from a 1991 survey, over 36% of young men joined the Yakuza because of their captivating on-screen image. However, the more the gangsters delved into the arts, the more outright junk was released. Moreover, the Japanese themselves were no longer naive to the fact that the Yakuza was not about honor, style, or mystery, but about drugs, blackmail, and corruption. In essence, the Yakuza themselves hurt the genre about themselves until it was reinvented by the great director Takeshi Kitano. Another avenue of Yakuza PR is fan fiction magazines, which particularly surged in the 1980s. Previously, Japan published 3 weekly and 3 monthly magazines. Among them, one could read interviews with real oyabuns. Naturally, the texts underwent strict censorship. Perhaps the best piece about the Yakuza, don't be surprised, is a video game. It's called simply Yakuza. If you watch any documentary about Japanese gangs, you are sure to find comments there. Thank you for the video, but it's strange that you didn't mention Kiryu. Kiryu is the main protagonist in this game. As former criminals themselves say, Kiryu is the last and most genuine Yakuza, who follows honor and ninjo. The game is about fights. It's dynamic and phantasmagorical, but surprisingly, it is very accurate in details. In Kabukicho, the favorite way to start a fight is to hit an opponent over the head with a bicycle. If you've seen this in video games, yes, that's how it happens in life. This is confirmed by the Yakuza themselves. Their love for public baths, karaoke, even fighting. The game surprisingly accurately conveys the aesthetics of the groups, but the main direction on which the Yakuza builds its reputation for many years is volunteer work during natural disasters. Yes, don't be surprised. Every time the country is seriously shaken, an army of Yakuza volunteers comes out to help everyone. It was so in the year 1964 in Niigata, when the Yamaguchi Gumi mobilized a third of their fighters to help the victims. The same happened in the year 1978 during the earthquake in Miyagi. But the most terrible year was 1995. In the very city of Kobe, almost 6,500 people died from the earthquake. 200,000 buildings were destroyed. Credit must be given to the Yakuza. They really worked on the ground much faster than the government. They distributed blankets, pillows, diapers to people for free. There was no slow bureaucracy or red tape. While the authorities were figuring out how not to violate another law, the criminals had their hands free. This was acknowledged even by the police. Moreover, the Yakuza maintained order on the streets and in temporary shelters. They made sure there was no looting or violence. Anyone could come to the gang headquarters, where kiosks with hot food and essentials awaited them. After the events in Kobe, dozens of associations wrote open letters of gratitude to the Yakuza. The same happened in 2011 after the tragedy in Fukushima, when an earthquake and tsunami caused a disaster at a nuclear power plant. In those days, the boss of Yamaguchi Gumi proudly personally delivered drinking water, cooked fried noodles for the victims. The Yakuza came to homes, crowds gathered there, they showed their tattoos, saying they were now the security here. For some time in shelters, there were more Yakuza than police officers. They even coordinated the work of real volunteers. For example, they monitored where to purchase humanitarian supplies so as not to empty all the stores. Moreover, the gangsters were not afraid to venture into the most dangerous zones where radiation levels were high. It is important to emphasize a crucial point here. Many gangs did not even consider proclaiming from the rooftops that they were providing assistance during such a catastrophe. For example, the Inagawa Kai gang always wore long sleeves without any organization insignia. Each second person wore gloves so that no one would see that they were missing phalanges on their fingers. Furthermore, judging by many interviews with ordinary people, the gangsters often helped out of a pure heart, and not for publicity. The Yakuza at the time said that the disaster erased the boundaries between ordinary people and criminals. Perhaps they would go back to robbing, dealing in trash and killing, but this earthquake, they quoted, was one of the few instances where we could become better than usual. So what does this mean? Might the Yakuza not be such bad guys? And what if I told you that if it weren't for the Yakuza, there might not have been the Fukushima disaster at all? Meet the Tokyo Electric Power Company, the very operator of the ill-fated Fukushima. As it became known after the accident, for many years it had close ties with the Yakuza. Firstly, infiltration happened from the bottom. Anyone could get a job at TEPCO. No security checks were conducted at that time. People with fake documents often got hired. After the accident, no less than 140 such individuals were counted at this critical infrastructure facility. In addition, the nuclear power industry is huge. The field for mastering money there is an unploughed rice field. TEPCO regularly turned to the Yakuza gangs when they needed people for manual labor. They were referred to in Japan as nuclear gypsies. There was a saying in nuclear towns, if a person wants to survive, they go work in the nuclear industry. The Yakuza regularly took untrained people from the streets and threw them into the most difficult jobs at the stations. The second scenario was to send a person who owed them a lot of money there. We know this well, because in 2012, one of such bosses was imprisoned for it. The Yakuza assisted the station operator with construction as well. Those very land sharks would arrive on the scene and quickly find common ground with the locals. According to police estimates, the Yakuza deployed forces to Fukushima in the volume of no less than 50 clans totaling 1,000 people. Some stayed in this business. Mid-level Yakuza openly admitted that liquidating accidents could earn more than drug trafficking. Moreover, the risks were zero, especially if you followed all radiation protection rules. There was also more traditional business. We know that the station operator company had worked with Yakuza contractors for over 20 years. Alternatively, they could have paid an intermediary connected with the Yakuza $1.5 million for some consulting. The Yakuza themselves admitted to a significant deal between politicians, business, and the criminal world. Let's not forget that the Yakuza are closely integrated into the construction business and, by various estimates, receive from 1 to 5% from all constructions in Japan. The atomic industry is just like any major construction project, only significantly longer and more expensive. What is the most important aspect of this entire story? From the report of the independent commission investigating the Fukushima disaster, we learn that if it weren't for the station operator, the catastrophe could have been avoided. Quote, they effectively violated the nation's right to protection from nuclear accidents. Thus we conclude that the accident was clearly man-made. We cannot assert this definitively, but on one point we can be certain. The Yakuza made a significant amount of money from Japan's atomic industry. In any case, no matter how the Yakuza tried to portray themselves as knights protectors, they were too late because their fate had long been sealed. And now we begin the concluding part of our release. The year 2007, night. A lonely policeman is bored at the station. He decides to download to his computer a few very specific adult films, including those with cephalopods. But for some reason, he uploads to a file-sharing site a folder containing all the materials his department had on the local Yakuza gangs. The list of front companies, the names and addresses of Oyabuns, their wives' and mistresses' names. The files were quickly deleted, but one journalist managed to download them from these servers. His name was Jake Edelstein. He was a gaijin, a foreigner who had worked for many years at Japan's largest newspaper, publishing investigations about Yakuza gangs. He delved into this archive and saw something strange. Remember, I mentioned how the Yakuza attacked the son of a journalist who wrote unfavorable things about the gangs. Well, that attempt was orchestrated by Tadamasa Goto, one of the leaders of a group subordinate to the Yamaguchi Gumi. He had about 900 people from 100 companies at his disposal. This is an utterly ruthless character, with at least 12 human lives on his hands. They even asked him, "Tadamasa, did you kill this person?" And he would reply, "Of course not me, but he deserved it." Anyway, leaked documents revealed that this Tadamasa, for some reason, could travel to the United States quite freely, whereas entry was strictly prohibited for him, as you understand. Something was amiss, Edelstein thought, and rightly so. An FBI contact told him, "You need to check the clinic at UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles." And imagine this. It turned out that at this clinic, Goto had a liver transplant performed by America's leading surgeon. On average, the wait for such an operation takes several years, but Goto was accepted without delay. What a coincidence. After this, the Yakuza boss donated $100,000 to the clinic. UCLA even put up a plaque in his honor. The investigation would reveal that American livers were transplanted to at least 4 criminal Yakuza bosses. Given that they jumped the line and delayed others, 186 Americans never received their operations. The deal was overseen by the FBI. Details emerged. It turned out that Goto approached the special services himself. He was dying. Due to tattoos, alcohol and drugs, his liver was failing. Goto proposed to the Americans, "I'll turn over all my brothers to you, in exchange for a new liver." The FBI, after a brief consideration, agreed. However, it turned out that Goto deceived them. For some reason, the FBI allowed him to receive the liver first, and only then reveal his comrades. As a result, Goto fed them a bunch of lies, updated his liver, and disappeared back to Japan. Nonetheless, the leads obtained by the American agents proved to be useful. Upon re-evaluating the Goto case, the federal agents uncovered how the Yakuza laundered money through the Las Vegas casinos. They managed to confiscate $50 million, but this was a pittance compared to what Goto could have disclosed. When journalist Jake Edelstein learned about this story, he tried to publish it in the Japanese newspaper where he worked. However, he was refused. The editor hinted that the story was too dangerous to be published. To make the story known to the audience, Edelstein had to resign. Many of his colleagues even condemned him at the time. After all, how could a brazen foreigner, a gaijin, betray the corporation? The journalist decided to try his luck with other publications. It didn't work out. The Japanese feared retribution. American publishers agreed. However, these simpletons thought it would be great to put a summary of the yet-to-be-published material online. By doing so, they signed Edelstein's death warrant. The leader of the group, Tadamasa Goto, immediately recognized himself as the main character in the story and became furious. Threats poured in against the journalist. If you publish the story, not only will it be the end of you, but also your entire family in America. Fortunately, Edelstein met a wise person who explained to him that after such a turn of events, The only chance to save himself was not to run, but rather to publish the story as quickly as possible. This way, Jake would become too big to kill, and problems would begin for the leader of the gang himself. And that's exactly what happened. The full version of the investigation was finally published in leading American media. Japanese journalists limited themselves to dry reprints, but they were sufficient to create what was called the Goto shock, one of the turning points in the history of the Yakuza. Imagine, for betraying the clan, Tadamasa Goto, the main gangster of Yamaguchi-gumi, was fired. He was not rolled into a sushi roll instead of eel, not chopped up into sashimi, not cooked into ramen, nor were his finger segments grilled teriyaki style. Progressive times had come, and the top management of the gang decided it was better to send this man into retirement, allowing him to peacefully enjoy his renewed liver. After that, Goto left the country for a while, then became a Buddhist priest. He returned to Japan, wrote an autobiography, and now at 82 years old he rests in eternal enlightenment. This is a typical story for an ex-Yakuza, and there are many videos on YouTube with former gangsters giving very candid interviews. Such bravery awakens in them only because, in Japan, it is not customary to kill clergy, which they have become. Therefore, on camera, they pretend to be noble knights, unafraid of death. In fact, they feel extremely confident because they hide behind a bulletproof monk's robe. Another deceit. I told you the story of Goto and Adelstein's investigation to highlight a few points. First, honor among criminals is by no means the tablets from Mount Sinai. If it really comes down to it, the Yakuza can even betray their own father. Second, the entire story took place in 2008, which is quite recent. The fact that Japanese publishers were afraid to publish it shows how much ordinary citizens there distrust the government and the police, and how deeply the fear of the Yakuza has embedded itself in Japanese society. Lastly, it is largely due to Goto and his crimes that the Yakuza in Japan will soon disappear as a phenomenon. The first laws against gangs were introduced as early as the 1950s, and that was when prostitution bans appeared. In 1970, a big scandal ended the career of Yoshio Kodama. Amidst a wave of arrests, the number of Yakuza continued to decline. But back then, it all came down to cosmetic changes. The police eradicated small groups, while large ones like Yamaguchi-gumi only strengthened. Real bans emerged later when the authorities banned corporate extortion, and in 1992, they finally acknowledged the existence of organized crime groups in the country. The triggers for a serious campaign against the Yakuza were the very clan wars within Yamaguchi-gumi, and secondly, the bursting financial bubble. When real estate began to devalue, the police started discovering bodies of bankers one after another. All of them owed money to the Yakuza. The majority then understood that crime had penetrated too deeply into the country's economy. Major newspapers wrote that our country was made a laughingstock. In those same months, Goto's people decided to take vengeance on a director who made a film critical of the Yakuza. They attacked him near his home and left dozens of deep scars on his face. As Goto later confessed, "I am very pleased they did that." After this, it became obvious to the police that perhaps it was time to end with the Yakuza. Thus, the laws of 1992 were enacted, which prohibited extortion, forceful seizure of land, and another 25 types of activities usually carried out by the Yakuza. The real catastrophe for crime occurred in 2011. The Ministry of Justice of the country made a decision comparable in severity to the policies of Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele. Inhumane, but extremely effective. The ban now hit not only the Yakuza, but the entire Japanese society. Everyone became accomplices. Now, any person who interacts with the Yakuza also breaks the law, allowing them to rent an apartment, reserve a table at a restaurant. All of this could now land someone in jail. In practice, this means the Yakuza were deprived of basic civil rights. They can pay for a phone, utilities, open a business or a bank account, rent housing, go to a bath or gym, any place where their tattoos might be seen. Even official Yakuza festivals where they could show off their tattoos were being banned. Harsh, but the scheme works. Since the anti-Yakuza laws were introduced, The right to live has evaporated. The total breakdown of the social contract. As a result, over the last 35 years, the number of Yakuza has decreased from 100,000 to just 15,000. Criminals no longer get tattoos, as they know it is not beneficial for them. There is a high probability that within half a century, the world's most resilient mafia will disappear as a phenomenon.